Writing is a powerful tool for thinking, learning, and communicating. Teachers need to understand something about how writing can foster learning that will help enhance students' learning in the content areas. Both formal and informal writing have value in content areas. And in chapter 10, we're going to look at some informal strategies that help students write to learn. Informal writing, for example, learning logs, journals, or think writes, can give students an opportunity to try out ideas and develop writing fluency. So, students need a way to hold their thinking as they try to comprehend information, whether that information is presented in text, or a lecture, or lab, or a problem solving session, or even a discussion. Note making strategies need to be taught through direct instruction, and then students need opportunities to practice their note making. Students do not automatically come into your class knowing how to take quality notes or how to put it together in a way that holds their thinking for them adequately. So that is something that has to be directly taught. Ideally, teachers would gradually teach at least 3 of the strategies that we're going to talk about here, and then provide opportunities for their students to practice each one. And eventually, this would lead to allowing students to pick the strategy that works best for them. We're going to talk about 3 pretty generic note-making strategies that are listed here. The 2-column notes is also known as Cornell notes, and this provides a very systematic approach to organizing and studying class notes. It has basically 5 steps. You divide the notebook paper in half, you record lecture notes in the right column, and then major concepts in the left column, and then you can put in some sketchy notes from the textbook. You can then ultimately study the notes by folding the paper in half so that only one column is visible. The read aloud note-taking method is especially useful when teaching struggling readers how to improve their listening and note-making skills. So like the split page or Cornell notes method that we just saw, the read aloud note-taking method requires students to jot down facts in the right-hand column and then classify the facts into main idea topics or concepts in the left-hand column. The only difference between these 2 methods is that in the read aloud note-taking method, the teacher reads the passage aloud and then scaffolds the entire process for the students. The insert note-making strategy is useful for both narrative and expository text. Expository text is going to be nonfiction. To increase the effectiveness of the insert method, you want to have your students use their insert chart and then organize by whether the information is new or known, and then reorganize the information by concepts. The insert method helps students develop metacognitive strategies. Chapter mapping note-making strategy is particularly well suited for science and social studies text. And that's because those texts are usually very well organized with headings and subheadings. Keep in mind that with very dense text, chapter mapping is really best applied to only a section of the text if you have a really dense chapter. The advantage to this is that you have all your notes on one side of one sheet of paper. And this particular note-making strategy does not appeal to everyone, but it does appeal strongly to some students who their brains really work appropriately with this strategy. So strategies that enable students to hold their thinking and emphasize the structure of the content being studied, this tends to be teacher-directed rather than student-directed. And this is because students usually lack the deep knowledge of the discipline or the content area to understand which structure is needed or is involved. Structured notes are an excellent choice when you wish to alert students to the structure of the content that underlies the text. Teaching students to use consistent headings to organize their notes in specific content areas facilitates students' understanding of this underlying content structure. And you can see an example in Figure 10.3 in your text. It gives a chart summarizing several knowledge domain structures. Structured notes are also helpful when using non-textbook sources, particularly when the text lacks the structure of, say, headings and subheadings, because that scaffolds readers' comprehension. Structured notes are also a good choice when you're using newspapers or periodicals or even primary documents. And you can see an example of this on page 262 of your text. A learning log or a journal is a really useful tool in any content area. There are a variety of learning log and journal formats, and what students actually write in them varies widely as well. It all is dependent on the content area. An alternative to learning logs or journals that does not require a long-term commitment is the ThinkWrite. This is sometimes called an entrance slip or exit slip. Generally, ThinkWrites, learning logs, and journals are used by students to reflect on what and how they are learning. These can be valuable sources of information for both the teacher and the student as we go through the journey of learning. Creative writing to learn activities can engage oftentimes the most uninterested student. So different kinds of poems can be useful strategies to help students summarize content information in a very non-traditional way. Found poems and photographs are particularly well suited to history and the fine arts. The way in which a writing assignment is designed and presented typically influences the student's success. So giving students some choice in their topics, specifying an audience and the purpose for the writing. You can also vary the format of the writing and then guide them on these stages. All makes it easier for the writing to be produced and also easier for the reading. RAF2 is an example of a strategy that is useful not only to structure writing assignments that help students learn content, but also to structure culminating activities. So you can see on page 274 of your chapter, it's figure 1010, you can see the possible modes for writing, and then on figure 1011, which is on page 275, you see a RAF2 example. When teachers help students use writing to learn, they put a very powerful learning tool to use in the service of teaching their particular content.